All right, so good evening. Thanks to those of you who are joining live. I appreciate it. And for those of you who are watching the recording, I also appreciate you taking the time. Welcome to Holding Government Accountable. My name is Dr. Josh Franco, your Assistant Professor of Political Science at Cuyamaca College. Let's go ahead and share the presentation here. Get this out going. Cool. So this workshop is about and is focused on how individuals inside and outside of government hold it accountable to the Constitution, federal and state laws, and regulations. We have 16 of these workshops. This is the 8th one, so we're almost halfway through, and they're every Wednesday from 7:30 to 8 p.m. Just a quick note that we won't be having a workshop next week because it's spring break, so enjoy your spring break. Today, we'll be talking about Congressional Oversight of U.S. foreign policy, a very timely subject, especially given the recent invasion of Ukraine by the Russian government. So let's go ahead and take a look at week 8. So our learning objectives with this workshop are the following. First is to explain how the rock, paper, scissors game is an analog to the U.S. Senate, the U.S. House, and the White House. Identify at least 2 types of foreign policy. Identify at least 2 executive branch departments or agencies that conduct foreign policy. And then lastly is to identify at least 1 congressional committee that oversees foreign policy. So I'm going to turn on the animations on this. So we have obviously the House and the Senate. So the Senate is the upper chamber with 100 members. Each state in the union has 2 representatives. And we have the House of Representatives, which has 435 individuals, and it's essentially proportioned to the state's population. So for example, California has 53 House of Representatives members, while the state of Montana has 1. We also have the White House. So the White House, obviously, this is where the president is based. And they are the chief foreign officer, or I would say the commander-in-chief, which has control over the military, but the chief international diplomat. So we don't have like in some countries, they might have a president and prime minister where the president kind of does foreign relations and the prime minister deals with domestic issues. Here in the United States, we have 1 executive, the president, who conducts both foreign policy and domestic policy as well. Now, I like using this analogy of rock, paper, scissors to describe the relationship between the Senate and the House of Representatives and the White House, because it helps to describe that not any one has a center of power. Obviously, at times and at places and in circumstances, the White House might have more power, or the Senate might have some power, or the House might have some power, while most of the times the White House and the president has the most power when it comes to foreign policy. But I also want to highlight that there's a balance that is achieved between these 3. So for example, instead of imagining scissors, right, we have the United States Senate. And instead of imagining paper, we have the House of Representatives. And instead of imagining rock, we have the White House. And each of these can interact and counteract each other given particular circumstances and challenges. So it's just important to point out that foreign policy isn't made in a vacuum. It's not just the president saying, I want to do this, I'm going to do it. It isn't just the House of Representatives saying, let's pass a law or a resolution to suggest or to recommend or to require actions by the executive branch. It isn't the Senate doing the same or trying to hold over questions about treaties and other international obligations to some later time. Each of these bodies interacts in some way to help shape and craft foreign policy. Now, when it comes to foreign policy, there's 4 different types I like to kind of frame it as. First, we have diplomatic, military, economic, and humanitarian. And we'll go ahead and walk through some examples of this. So when it comes to diplomatic, an operationalization of this idea would be the Department of State. So the Department of State, and you'll see the logo here on the right-hand side, advises the president on issues of foreign policy, supports democracy, freedom, and prosperity for all people around the world, and fosters conditions that favor stability and progress worldwide. The Department of State is based over in Washington, D.C., in a location called Foggy Bottom, which is near Georgetown. And they function as the government's arm and presence around the world. So, for example, embassies, U.S. embassies in other countries are overseen by the Department of State. This Department of State is run by the Secretary of State, which is the president's chief foreign policy officer. And they typically are the individual who will go overseas on behalf of the president to meet with world leaders and other dignitaries to discuss foreign policy, to debate it, and then to take action accordingly. Next, we have military foreign policy. So in this case, it's operationalized as the Department of Defense, and this provides the military forces needed to deter war and protect national security. Under the president, the Secretary of Defense directs and exercises the authority and control over the separately organized departments of the Air Force, the Army, and the Navy, over the Joint Chiefs of Staffs, and over combatant commands, and over defense agencies and field activities. Now, in the upper right here, you'll see a picture of the Pentagon, which is the hub or the nerve center of the Department of Defense. As mentioned in this description, it's overseen by a Secretary of Defense. So this is the president's chief military officer, a civilian officer. Now, this is important to note that when it comes to our military in this country, it has civilian oversight or civilian control. So first, the president is the commander in chief, and then the Secretary of Defense as an appointee of the president that's confirmed by the Senate. And for all intents and purposes, the military cannot make decisions without civilian authorization. And this is an important kind of difference that maybe in other countries we don't see. By having civilian oversight, you basically give another level of control over the military. And this is important in our country because obviously we have a very powerful, vast military, not just here domestically, but around the world. And it's always important that those policy decisions and those actions are taken with civilian approval. Next, we have economic foreign policy. So under here, we have a couple of entities or organizations that are important in this space. First is the U.S. Trade Representative. This person formulates trade policy for and directs all trade negotiations of the United States. So they are the president's chief trade negotiator with other countries when they're developing trade agreements and or amendments to existing agreements. Secondly, you have the Trade and Development Agency. This advances economic development and U.S. commercial interests in developing and middle-income countries. It's essentially our government-sponsored arm to in other parts of the world to try to promote access to markets, the development of the sale of goods and services produced in the United States in those countries, and trying to support the conditions that allow for that exchange of goods and services. In other words, like the Trade and Development Agency wants to support governments in other countries so that they can protect any assets or other capital that private U.S. companies may bring into those spaces to develop, either raw materials, factories, technology, and things like that. Lastly, you have the U.S. Trade Commission. So this provides the president, the U.S. Trade Representative, and the Congress with independent analysis of and information on tariffs and trade. So the U.S. Trade Representative is the chief trade negotiator for the president. The Trade and Development Agency operates in particular countries around the world to open up new markets for commercial interests of the United States. And then the U.S. International Trade Commission provides these entities, along with the president, information, right? Independent analysis. So the U.S. Trade Representative can go off and do some and attempt to make trade policy and trade agreements. The Trade Commission might be a part of that conversation because they provide, say, a report that describes the trade regime on the ground between the United States and another country, as an example. So these are economic elements of our foreign policy. Lastly, you have humanitarian. So two examples of humanitarian foreign policy include the Peace Corps and the U.S. Agency for International Development. So the Peace Corps, in this case, gives the people of host countries increased access to trained volunteers with skills and specializations, and to deepen mutual understanding between Americans and countries served. The Peace Corps was established in the 1960s by then President John F. Kennedy as an executive order, and then it was later codified into law. The Peace Corps has, in its long history, has basically established a peaceful kind of presence in other parts of the world. In other words, sending the civilians into other countries, supporting them to provide support in those countries for any particular communities or projects or things of that nature. The second agency is the U.S. Agency for International Development. This seeks to eradicate extreme global poverty and enables resilient and democratic societies to realize their potential. What they functionally do is channel foreign aid, U.S. funded foreign aid, into countries to either develop, agricultural, technical assistance, like how do you farm better, how do you have greater yields, kind of hospital, medical, and other technical assistance, maybe educational infrastructure, water, transportation infrastructure. So the USAID is basically the way of channeling financial resources into countries around the world to help develop their human and their physical and human infrastructure to help support the development of these countries. So all in all, those are the 4 different foreign policy areas, right? We have diplomatic, military, economic, and humanitarian. So when you hear foreign policy, you should be like, oh, okay, it's just the president saying stuff. That's a simple view. You want to make it a little more complicated by saying, well, different types of foreign policy, obviously overseen by different executive branch agencies and obviously engaged with or developed by Congress or criticized by the Congress. So let's go ahead and talk about Congress's foreign policy committees. In the U.S. Senate, there are 3 foreign policy committees that oversee these 4 different foreign policy types. You have the Armed Services, the Foreign Relations, and the Finance Committee. Now, you might hear those and say, okay, Armed Services sounds like military. That's correct. So they oversee the Department of Defense. Foreign Relations, that oversees the Department of State. And you might say Finance, like where's that? What does that cover? That covers the economic side or the trade side of foreign policy. On the U.S. House of Representatives side, you have the Armed Services Committee again, the Foreign Affairs Committee, and then the Ways and Means Committee. And again, Armed Services oversees Department of Defense, Foreign Affairs, Department of State, and Ways and Means oversees trade. So these are Congress's foreign policy committees. These are the entities that will oversee the actions of the executive branch to make sure they're consistent with the law, to hold hearings, to hold them accountable, to allow for interest groups to serve as witnesses alongside of these executive agencies, to provide their input and feedback, and to answer questions of the Congress. Now, obviously, a hot topic for the past month now is the invasion of Ukraine. And the question you might have is, how is the Congress overseeing or holding the executive branch, in this case, the president, and these different foreign policy arms, diplomatic, military, economic, and humanitarian? How is it overseeing all this action? So the way we do this is we'd go to congress.gov and we use the search term Ukraine, and that we would go to the filters and uncheck them all, and then we would recheck committee meetings. So I'll go ahead and click on that link here, and it should pop up the legislative search results. Good. So here we see that when I type in Ukraine and we use the filters of Ukraine itself, and in the 117th Congress, which is from 2021 to 2022, and committee meetings, we have 64 search results. Let me zoom in just a little bit to make this clearer for us. So here we see that there's been a range of meetings, or there are a range of meetings. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a couple of them here. So I'm going to start with this one, which is to receive a closed briefing on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This was held March 17th at 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. So let's go ahead and click on that. Given that it was closed, I don't expect a lot of information, but we'll find out in a moment if there's anything there. So we'll go ahead and click on the website for the Senate Armed Services Committee. We'll click on hearings, their webpage. And this was on the 17th. So it does not look like it is public. Let me just double check the search results, 17th. Yeah, they don't have it here in their public database, which is kind of a bummer, but not surprising. When they have closed briefings, those are essentially they are not public. So while we know that the Senate's in theory holding the executive branch accountable, after the Senate will hear a presentation from the executive branch, and obviously they're going to ask questions. So that's a mechanism holding it accountable. It just doesn't happen, at least for us to watch or observe. Just take another look here. There's, interestingly enough, there is a group called the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, or it's called the U.S. Helsinki Commission. So I'm going to go and click on this. Now you might be asking, this commission, like, is that Congress? And the answer is technically no, it is not. And I'm going to click on that group and I'm going to open their webpage. So the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe. So let me just click on the About page so we can get a little more information and context for them. And I'm going to go ahead and have this read to us because this is a good body that wasn't covered, right? Congressional Oversight. I'm going to just highlight this part and have this read to us.
The Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, also known as the U.S. Helsinki Commission, is an independent commission of the U.S. federal government. For over 45 years, the Commission has monitored compliance with the Helsinki Accords and advanced comprehensive security through promotion of human rights, democracy, and economic, environmental, and military cooperation in the 57-nation OSCE region.
So this is an independent agency. This was created by an act of Congress and signed into law, and have this purpose and responsibility of security and cooperation in Europe. Now let's go ahead and see if we can find their hearing. Let me zoom out a little bit. About the commission. Let's see. Public meetings. Staff. Hearing. So they just had a hearing today called Containing Russia in the Senate office building. Let's go ahead and listen to this for a little bit. Here's the volume. Waiting for it to get to the actual opening.
Personal interactions over many, many years. She was, of course, our UN ambassador under President Clinton and became Secretary of State, the first woman to hold that position. She was a powerful figure in the global community and a powerful figure here in America. I know that her good counsel is going to be missed by all. And on behalf of the Helsinki Commission, we express our deepest condolences to her family. She was a refugee from Prague in 1948. So her whole life experience really prepared her for the challenges that she could confront and make such a contribution in regards to furthering diplomacy.
What the chairman, Mr. Cardin, who's a former senator, unless he's a senator now, I think he actually is a senator now, I have to double check. He's talking about former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who had passed away just today. And as he mentioned, she was the first woman Secretary of State and just a force in American diplomacy and politics in general. Let me just double check. I'm pretty sure Ben Cardin's still a senator. Yeah. So he's a current senator overseeing who's a member, chairman of the commission. So this is, like, you see that nexus of congressional oversight. So if we listen to this hearing a little bit more, we'd probably get some more details about how Congress is containing Russia. So I'm gonna go ahead and play this again. I want to see if we get to like a snippet of that.
This is our third hearing of the Helsinki.
If the senator would
Sure.
yield.
Senator
I want to subscribe to the comments of my friend Senator Cardin about Madeleine Albright. I actually had more dealings with her after she left public service, and we were associated together on some human rights initiatives. I had the honor.
And this is Senator Roger Wicker from, I want to say Mississippi. I'll have to double check.
Secretary Albright.
So as he's giving his kudos to former Secretary Madeleine Albright.
Of my career in public service. So I wanted to add my expression of appreciation for a life well lived and a public service well rendered.
Your observation about her contributions after she left public office are so well placed. I was with her on several occasions where she used her talent to help bridge communities and to help advance U.S. national security concerns as a private citizen in an extremely effective manner. What a just a dignified person and what an incredible leader. We now are holding our third hearing in regards to Ukraine. We had our first hearing, a basic overview of the threat that Mr. Putin posed to Ukraine under the leadership of Senator Wicker. We had a hearing last week in regards to the Baltic states, the front line, in regards to countries that understand what Ukraine is going through today, since they experienced a similar assault on their country under the Soviet Union. This hearing, we will explore the containing Russia oppression, containing Russia, opposing Russia's imperialism in Ukraine and beyond. We are also, just for the members of the commission, we are looking at having additional hearings, and they will be coming up rather quickly because of the urgency of the circumstance. I know that Congressman Cohn is directly interested in helping us put together a hearing in regards to understanding Russia's propaganda campaign. We will have a hearing to deal with the risk factors of the refugees, particularly the children, who could well end up victims of trafficking. We want to pay attention to that under the Helsinki Commission. And I know the Senator Whitehouse is interested in us putting together a hearing that I know Senator Wicker and I are going to be very much interested in, and that is enforcing the individual sanctions, the Magnitsky sanctions, and looking at the use of shell corporations, et cetera, and how do we trace to make sure that we actually get the enforcement of our sanctions. I say all that because we're going to be busy in the Helsinki Commission, and it's just a clear message that we stand with the people of Ukraine.
So there you have it, an example of an independent commission that's chaired by current U.S. senators who are helping to conduct oversight of the, in this case, the actions of the executive branch and what's happening in the Ukraine caused by the Russian invasion. So with that, let me go ahead and get us to the wrapped up our presentation here. So some other examples that are included in the slides when you check them out is there's a website called foreignassistance.gov, which is a great it has all the data for all the countries in the world that the U.S. gives aid to and what type of aid and how much. So if you want to check that out, I encourage you to do so. And there's also, if you're interested in this topic, there's a number of great things you can engage with that are publicly available. But one book that's available is called Watchdogs on the Hill. And this describes basically how the U.S. Congress's job is to hold the president accountable in conducting foreign policy. But what's happened over the years is that the Congress has basically given that responsibility to the executive branch, that it's like ceded its oversight of foreign policy. And I think that might be changing now, or has been changing over the past decade, particularly with the Iraq and Afghanistan wars in the early 2000s. And then obviously with the conclusion of the Afghanistan war last year, shaping Congress's view that it has to take a more active role in what's going on around the world, and not just letting the president do what they want, even if they are of the same political party. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Say thank you for taking the time to listen in or to watch the recording. We'll go ahead and move to our discussion. Thanks for your time and have a great night.